You did it again this morning. Maybe you were looking for your keys. Maybe you muttered, okay, 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 under your breath before a hard email. Maybe you stood in the kitchen and said your own name out loud, quietly, like a coach talking to a player. You barely noticed. Nobody was there. And yet a voice came out of you, aimed at no one but yourself. You think this is just a quirk, a little glitch, something slightly embarrassing you'd rather people didn't catch. But the real answer is far stranger. That voice is not a malfunction. It is one of the most powerful tools your mind has ever built. And the story of where it came from reaches all the way back into your own childhood, into the deep structure of human language, and into a question you have probably never asked. Who exactly is talking? And who is listening? So start with the obvious version, the out-loud kind. You talk to yourself when you're stressed, when you're concentrating, when you're alone in a way that feels safe. You narrate your own steps. Wallet, phone, keys. You scold yourself after a mistake. You hype yourself up before something frightening. Most people assume this is a sign of a mind that's a little frazzled, a little disorganized, maybe a little odd. But watch a small child, and you'll see the truth. This is where you began. Watch a 4-year-old build a tower of blocks. She talks the entire time. Put this one here. No, too big. The red one goes on top. She is not performing for anyone. She is not asking for help. She is narrating her own actions to herself, out loud, in real time. Psychologists have a name for this. They call it private speech. And in the 1930s, a Soviet psychologist named Lev Vygotsky noticed something about it that changed how we understand the human mind. Vygotsky watched children do exactly this, and he asked a question no one else was asking. What happens to that voice as the child grows up? Because it doesn't vanish. A 7-year-old talks to herself less than a 4-year-old. A 10-year-old, less still. The out-loud narration seems to fade away. But Vygotsky argued it wasn't disappearing at all. It was going underground. The voice, he said, doesn't leave. It goes quiet. It moves inward. The talking out loud becomes thinking in words. The coach that used to speak from outside your mouth simply steps inside your head and keeps coaching, silently, for the rest of your life. Sit with that for a moment. The voice you hear in your own mind when you think, the inner narrator you're using to process these very words, may have started as a literal, audible voice you once used as a child, out loud, to help yourself stack blocks. This inner version has a name too. Psychologists call it inner speech. And the modern researcher who has spent his career listening for it, a British psychologist named Charles Fernyhough, describes it in a way that turns your whole sense of thinking upside down. Much of what you call thought, he argues, is not silent at all. It is a conversation. It has a voice. It has a rhythm. Sometimes it even has more than one speaker. Because here is the part that sounds impossible until you catch yourself doing it. When you talk to yourself, you are often two people at once. There is the you who speaks and the you who listens. There is the part that says, you can do this, and the part that needs to hear it. You are, in the most literal sense, holding a dialogue. You are your own coach and your own player, your own critic and your own defendant. Why would a brain be built like that? To answer that, you have to understand what language actually did to your mind. Language did not just let you talk to other people. It gave you a tool you could turn around and point back at yourself. Think about how you learned almost everything as a small child. Someone outside of you spoke. Careful, it's hot. Wait for the light. Good job, you did it. Instruction, warning, and encouragement all came from another person's mouth. Language arrived from the outside, as the voice of other people managing your behavior. And then something remarkable happened. You took that outside voice and made it your own. The parent who said, careful, becomes the inner voice that says, careful, when no parent is there. The teacher who said, check your work, becomes the silent nudge that makes you check your work at 30. You internalized the voices of everyone who ever guided you, and you built them into a private control panel for your own mind. This is not a metaphor. This is, as far as we can tell, how self-control is actually assembled. You do not come preloaded with the ability to stop yourself, focus yourself, or calm yourself. You learn it, from the outside in, as a voice. And then you keep the voice. Which is why, when things get hard, the voice comes back out. Under pressure, under stress, when the silent version isn't strong enough, you push the words back into the air where they started. You say, come on, out loud. You talk yourself through the panic step by step. You are reaching for the oldest tool you have, the one that worked when you were 4, because in a difficult moment a spoken instruction is simply more powerful than a whispered thought. But it gets more interesting and more useful than that. A psychologist at the University of Michigan named Ethan Kross spent years studying the voice in your head, especially the version that turns on you. The harsh one. The one that loops at 2 a.m. replaying your worst moment. He calls this inner noise chatter, and he discovered something almost magical about how to quiet it. It comes down to a single word. The word you use for yourself. When you talk to yourself using I, you tend to spiral. Why can't I handle this? I always mess this up. I'm going to fail. The I pulls you closer to the pain, drowns you in it. But Kross found that when people talk to themselves using their own name, or the word you, something shifts. You can do this. Come on, Sarah, you've handled worse. Suddenly there is a small, crucial distance. You are no longer trapped inside the feeling. You are standing slightly outside it, talking to yourself the way a calm friend would. He calls this distance self-talk. And in study after study, that tiny grammatical trick, swapping I for your own name, measurably lowers stress, improves performance under pressure, and helps people think more clearly in their hardest moments. It is one of the simplest psychological tools ever discovered, and you already own it. You've been using a clumsy version of it your whole life. Every time you said your own name out loud to steady yourself. Think about so who is the voice, really? It is not a stranger. It is not a sign that something is wrong. And this is why the tone of that voice matters so much. Because you are listening to it all day long. If the inner voice is cruel, if it calls you stupid and useless and hopeless, you are absorbing a running commentary of contempt from morning to night, in your own head, in your own words. But the astonishing thing Vygotsky's insight reveals is that this voice was learned, which means it can be taught. You can, slowly and deliberately, change the words you say to yourself. You can catch the harsh sentence and rewrite it. You can speak to yourself the way you would speak to someone you love. Because the part of you that listens is always, quietly, taking it all in. Here is something to try tonight. The next time you catch yourself in a spiral, stop and change one word. Instead of, why can't I do this, say your own name, and say you can figure this out. Watch what happens to the tightness in your chest. You are not talking to no one. You are talking to the one person who has to hear every single thing you say, forever, with no way to walk out of the room. For most of your life, you assumed the voice was just a strange habit, a little embarrassing, something to hide. But it is the sound of your own mind learning to guide itself, built from every voice that ever cared enough to speak to you, still speaking now when no one else is there. So the next time you catch yourself talking to yourself, don't be embarrassed. Listen closely, and maybe, gently, mind what you say, because someone is always listening. And it did it again this morning, and it will do it again tonight. And the only real question left is whether the voice you built is on your side.